All right. Hello and welcome to the CIS and Senteon webinar series, a webinar series teaching the technical settings of securing your Chrome browser this season. We have today's guest, Heather Nagel. Pleasure to have you on. Long-term friend at this point, seeing each other at shows and writing blogs together. I mean, really excited you wanted to be part of this webinar series, and thanks for being here, Heather.
Thanks for having me. Good fun.
Absolutely. So as per usual, today's agenda today, I'm going to do a little housekeeping, review a little bit about Senteon, what we're doing here today. I'll do a little deeper introduction into Heather, and then we'll get right into the settings per the new format of this season. So let me pop in with my screen share here in a moment. Click the buttons, something I should have had pulled up here before, but that's okay. All right. I'm gonna do this one and boom. All right, so Senteon again is a platform to automate the hardening of workstations, servers, and browsers. And we are doing this to the CIS standard. What this means is we are going including the remediation, monitoring, the change tracking, the reinforcement, and everything in between. And if we can have this share screen pop up for the live audience, that would be great. And these webinar episodes do happen weekly on Wednesdays. You can see these on our website, senteon.co, and this will show, unless I'm sharing the wrong screen. Oh, heartbreaking.
It's a Monday. It's not really on Wednesday. It's a Monday in disguise.
Yeah, that's exactly what this is. Sorry, I guess you can stop the screen share since I did the wrong screen. Anyway, senteon.co will have the additional webinars. We also share the previous webinars on our YouTube channel as well for you to catch after the fact. But with that said, let's get into the episode. So Heather, thank you for joining us. If you don't mind, give a little introduction of yourself. I know it's not the traditional cybersecurity background, but dive into it. Who's Heather?
All right. I remember the internet before anybody knew what it was. So that's really one of the defining moments of Heather. I sort of stumbled onto it in 1992. You know, what's this @sign? What's this email nonsense? Look, I can talk to people at Rutgers. And it was just cool. So, you know, I've been online forever. So I remember when Netscape would default your code to where you'd have a gray background if you didn't explicitly set that. So I understand, you know, setting defaults, and if you were on certain browsers, you know, anything but Netscape, you wouldn't even see that. So I know we're not here to talk about Netscape because rest in peace, Netscape, but you know, I get it. I have a background in software development and the software industry, and I own part of an export compliant software company. And so that was my very long career. And I like to preface it by how I got here is in the 90s, I was sort of working in HR because, you know, that's a natural path to tech. But I was working in HR and I had these tech skills from when I was tinkering as a kid. And if you had tech skills in the 90s, you were going to get siphoned into tech and you just didn't have any control over that. So that's what happened to me. And yes, AOL and Netscape was fun. I escaped AOL because I was in college. And so, you know, I had like the T1 baby. All right. But
your HR path, Heather. I mean, that's something Felicia talked about last week is HR actually needs to be responsible for the technology and making sure everyone else at the company is actually using it. So maybe not that weird of a start to get into the space.
Well, I was interviewing people all day long, and it was just a little much. And then I went from that to eventually coding all day in the dark all day long, and that was just too much. So I've made my niche like right where people in tech meet because that's necessary. Did a lot of software requirements and all that. So this will get me back on track. What I like to say is in the 90s, we were just crazy mad building stuff before the .com boom. Yeah, ARPANET, I never did that, Bob. But I even preempted it before it came on the screen. So if you had skill, you were coding, playing with data, doing the things, and you were doing it really madly because there were never enough IT people, never enough developers, never enough. And people needed things because we were moving in that direction. We were not thinking about security. You know, in those very early days in the 90s, we were just getting stuff out there. And if you wanted to make an impact, you were building. And now if you want to make an impact, you're securing. So here I am. A lot of upskilling, a lot of overlap, and a lot of not is what I'm finding in the couple of years I've been doing this.
I love the difference that you're calling out there, right? At first everyone was just build as fast as you can, get everything out, get what you can. Now we have everything, right? Everything's made already. Nothing's new anymore. Maybe.
Nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun. But now we have to take a step back and actually secure this. That's what you're saying, right?
It's very, very true. In that moment, you have the lightning bolt hit you of, okay, I got some penance to do here. And along the way, when it hit about 2000, we were still in the wild, wild west, but we were a little better about it. I have a famous saying of don't muck with the query string that came from my boss at the time, Andrew Hogue. And he's the founder of Now Secure. So, yeah, we were able to say we have this wild, wild west of pre.net. We're working in this. You can do anything for any reason at any time, and nobody's going to stop you. So you have to put some guardrails on yourself. So we were hardening. We were doing things like validating code, doing code reviews, and a lot of good practices once I officially got into tech before my shadow IT days. So that's my background. And I work now for the Missouri Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. And
Woo! That's a new position. Congrats, Heather.
It is a nonprofit, and I am part-time there as we're building the program, and we'll just see where that takes us for now, and doing some curriculum workforce development stuff. So,
yeah. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, Heather, that's not enough on the Missouri Center of Cybersecurity Excellence.
Okay.
I mean,
so we're not talking about Senteon today. I'm just going to talk about MCCOE. I'll tell you how we got
it. A little bit more, because what you guys are doing is so special. I mean, there's not a lot of nonprofits that focus on this needed space. So I do want to give you a few more minutes of fame. I mean, introduce this a little bit more for the audience.
So Missouri Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, heretofore to be known as MCCOE, because it is a nonprofit that is working to upskill students and potential students in the field of cybersecurity and get them some working experience, because as we see, just a degree or just certification set is typically not enough. And so we have to get people together and people who can train them together so that we can upskill our workforce. I live in the third largest city in Missouri. Metro area is about 500,000 people. So you got Kansas City here and St. Louis here, depending on which way you're looking. I know I'm reversed. At any rate, you get the idea. They're across from each other, and down here is Springfield. And we are the regional hub for all the rural areas where all the big medical presence, et cetera, a big set of universities. And instead of becoming an offshoot of a university, we decided to be a nonprofit. And with that, we can affiliate with all of the universities and our really awesome community college. I'll call it out, Ozarks Technical Community College, or OTC. And so it's really awesome in terms of preparing students for very real world things. They can come out of that community college with their Security Plus, their A Plus, their Network Plus, and their Linux Plus all within 2 years. In addition to coursework that supports how that goes. But then, you have the problem of, okay, great, I have all these certs and I have 2 years of schooling and I'm ready to go and I understand these things, but I have no experience unless I've lucked into an internship. And so we are providing that sort of additional training in context with industry professionals and with our staff, in addition to providing services and taking donations and grant funding, which, by the way, yes, Missouri has internet. I see that over there. You owe MCCOE a donation so we can have more. Okay?
Stuffy, we're going to drop the donation link just for you, brother.
Okay.
One more question to kind of wrap up, because it is very cool what they're doing there. I mean, MSPs even, may want some of this training. Is this targeted just at like high school kids, college kids, switching careers, or anybody?
It's a whole path. And we're looking at military, people transitioning out of the military. So there's the Skill Bridge program. And we're looking at people in community college and coming out of community college. We're looking at university students. And if there's somebody coming out of high school who has A+ or greater skills, then we're looking at those people as well. A lot of second career people is what we see, at least the pathway through OTC, where they've got what I mentioned a little bit earlier. But if we're trying to find a path so that anybody who's interested in cybersecurity, if they talk to us, we can give them something. Now, granted, we're fairly early. We got our SOC through not a donation, that's a grant. We have our SOC funded through a grant. It gets confusing after a while. And so that is operational as of April, and we've been doing some training in there. And we get our first big fall cohort of individuals who will be trained in the fall. And so we're madly scrambling to make sure that that's an awesome experience. So yeah, thank you for giving me that platform. I'm super excited about it.
Absolutely. And you have some fans in the comments as well. Darnell Moore is mentioning how absolutely smart you are and happy to see you. So, I mean, we're the lucky ones to have you on this show, Heather. So thank you for investing your time into giving back into this educational series. So with that, my question that I'm hopefully going to remember to ask every single week to set the stage. Heather, where is the most interesting place you've ever taken a customer phone call?
I was buying a car, and it was one of those, when 45 things have to align, it was really more like 7 and all go wrong at once. One of those scenarios specific to that specific customer and the settings that align with it, and then some nuance having to do with the space-time continuum. And that happened while I was buying a car in 2018. And the entire time we're trying to sign on this car, we'd already selected it. I'm on the phone giving guidance of stuff that's only in my head, which, that's bad to have anything that's only in your head, because I've worked there 22 years. So there were things only in my head. And so that was a good hour of time. And yeah, that was not pleasant. And I documented all that when I got back to the office.
The dealership was just waiting for you to get off the phone, or how did that go?
We were kind of interspersing like the whole, I'm a woman, I can multitask. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I
didn't really appreciate it though, but they took our money.
Too much fun. Of course, they never say no to that. Money is king. All right, very cool. Let's switch gears and get into the educational portion of today. So let's pull up today's presentation to set expectations for the audience. I think we have about 12 settings today. So not too fast. I think we have plenty of time. We're budgeting well. I will note last week I ran a little bit over, so I'm going to try to do a little bit better this week. But
I think you helped Zach last week on running over.
Oh, it is what it is. But as a reminder to everyone in the audience, the CIS benchmarks are produced and created by Center for Internet Security, CIS. And this is a nonprofit as well, built of about 30,000 plus security professionals to create best practice recommendations on how to secure various applications, various OS, as well as the greater CIS controls, which feed into the CIS benchmarks and vice versa. So for today, we will be talking about the settings to configure a Chrome browser securely. Let's kick into this first setting, Heather. So this first one here, it is, yes, Bob, first episode running over might have been due to the guest, but you'll never know.
No, you just need to watch it a couple times and then you'll know. It's good, but it's amazing. It's worth watching a couple times, right?
I mean, it's funny when I go back to watch these and I try to critique myself, but also I think the funniest thing for Senteon, we build all these slides, we remediate, we harden all of these settings. We know these settings inside and out. We'll have a guest like Matt or a various guest come on. We're like, oh, I didn't realize that about that setting. So everyone's learning here, which makes this webinar series so much fun. But first setting here, disable saving browser history is set to disabled. So I know this is a fun one, and I do need to call out. You will see a lot of settings sometimes say disable in the setting name and disabled as the recommendation. This is, in fact, a double negative, and this is written verbatim. I didn't just make these slides to be confusing. I copy and pasted. So this is very much how they're written, and this is CIS recommending to save password history. I'm sorry, browser history. Heather, tell us why this might be valuable to save.
Oh, well, before we do that, I have to make fun of that double negative you called out before, because that is the most confusing thing on the planet. Instead of giving you something that's easy to work with, you've actually got to think, what should I do? And so your slide's very helpful because it shows you what to do. On this, with the disabled, I want to also show that this is not mapped, because we're going to talk a little bit about going back to CIS controls. So this is one of those, it's a rogue. It's just good practice because we want to be able to see our browser history and to determine if anybody else is somehow using our browser or doing things. And so the interesting thing I also saw about this is when you look at the defaults and the actual benchmarks, it brings up this 3-condition Boolean thing. So this is an unset, but by being unset, it has to default to something because you have either true or false.
Yes.
So the unset on this means disabled. They couldn't just say disabled because there's actually a distinction between no one has touched this, and until someone touches it, it will be disabled. So I find this one confusing. What about you?
That is a great call out. So this is something, not talked about super often, right? So we talk about bad actors when they compromise a machine, getting lay of the land. When you have all of your settings to the default, a lot of the time it is not configured. Not configured doesn't mean it's not doing any behavior, but it's not explicitly set to do the correct action. That can make it a little bit more vulnerable. The attackers know what they're looking at. So even though this one is not set appropriately out of the gate and it has the right behavior, taking the extra few seconds to explicitly set this setting could very much help you out. So good call out on that, Heather. Very cool. So let's go to this next setting here. DNS interception checks enabled is set to enabled. And this one does, in fact, map back to a CIS control.
Or it's 7.7. I see it there in the gray, which I'm going to read to everybody just because I'm that way. Remediate detected vulnerabilities in software through processes and tooling on a monthly or more frequent basis, based on the remediation process. So, the first thing I got to do being a wordsmith, we have basis being based. So like all your base are belong to us with the basis base shows my age. At any rate here, this one is an interesting one before we even get into what it means, in that all the other ones we're looking at today, they're in the implementation group 1 for the CIS controls. This one's actually a 2. It's a level 1 on the safeguards over there. I don't know if you noticed that, but this one is fulfilling something in implementation group 2. So if you look at our lovely visuals for CIS control 7.7, you'll see that. At any rate, do you remember, obviously I do because I'm old, but the DNS spoofing, I remember when I just like an old ASP classic, I was like, oh, look at this. I can send my mom an email from godinheaven.com. So I did.
Of course you could. So you did.
So yeah, I was having a little fun with that and the spoofing and all the things we could do. As you know, we've locked down on that because it's pretty nasty when you spoof someone for malicious purposes. And when you look at DNS spoofing, then, as long as it looks like the site and nobody's looking at the address bar, or you're looking at it on mobile, you don't know. So we need to stop that redirect on thing A to thing B. We want to get on a plane when we're traveling and we want to know where we land. So that's the way I look at this one. So the other thing here, that I've already said the base thing. So the basis of the base and making sure that we need to do this, the basics of that, enable those DNS checks. And this is another one of those that is default to unset. And thankfully it's defaulted correctly, but like you said, they aren't all.
Yep. And that's, again, a good call out to emphasize here. One other note, you did bring up implementation groups and levels. Just so the audience understands, the CIS controls are broken up into implementation groups. These are kind of a way to prioritize which function of security or which layer, which aspect to really focus on first, second, or third, based on how secure you're looking to make your environment. The levels here are actually specific to the CIS benchmarks. Level 1, like you said, this is not explicitly configured, but the behavior is default. So level 1, you'd think it'd be implementation group 1, but it maps to implementation group 2. It's very confusing. They made this change when they switched from CIS version 7 to version 8 because this used to be IG1. Anyway, when you see level 1, this is something every business should be doing. It's not expected to cause disruption unless there's some really weird stuff going on. So level 1 setting, when you see that, this is something you should be doing in your environment.
And for people who are my age or thereabouts, I'm thinking like Missile Command. I don't know if you've ever played Atari Missile Command, but I'm hearing the sounds from that. So
perfect.
Anyway.
All right, let's get to this next setting here. Enable component updates in Google Chrome is set to enabled. So whenever I see update, I think the instinct is we should do said update. Unless it's Microsoft, we might wait a few months. But Heather, why might we want to make sure the Google components are up to date?
There are a bunch of things I found that are hidden behind the scenes doing things that we don't notice that we've got to keep enabled. And I'll just read a couple of them so we don't put everybody to sleep here. We have optimization hints. We have SSL error assistant. We have something called SW reporter. And then this one I think is pretty important, and PKI, or having to do with encryption metadata. So we want to make sure these things are up to date. Can you imagine like quantum computing hitting tomorrow and we don't have all of our stuff already? I mean, I know that's a silly thing because we're never going to be ready for that anyway. Well, maybe. But the idea is to keep everything that is necessary to operate updated. And so you'll see that these benchmarks will disable things that may make sense that you would think on first look that we might keep enabled for similar reasons, but I'm foreshadowing. Keep this one enabled. And we also want to call out CIS 7.4, because that is what this belongs to, which is perform application updates on enterprise assets through advanced path management on a monthly or more frequent basis. So
and I think Matt would agree. This is the right mapping.
Enable the enable and keep the patch things patched that need to be patched. So
perfect. All right. This next setting here is enable globally scoped HTTP auth cache is set to disabled. Interesting here. Can you kind of break this down for us? This one sounds a little bit more technical.
Sure. First, is that an ice cream cone over there on the between the two stars? I'm trying to figure out what that is.
It's supposed to be a key.
Is there an ice cream cone, a microphone, or a squid? I see the cloud over there and then the X, and then we've got an X over the cloud key. So, I mean, it's good. So, okay, in all seriousness, this is one of those that's not explicitly mapped back to the CIS controls. The word that comes to mind here is hijack. We want to keep any sort of credentials out of the browser cache. And what I looked into on this one, the specific to the HTTP auth creds or credentials, typically these are passed in those HTTP request headers when you're doing web stuff. And that is most likely in the authorization header in some form of either the actual creds or a token, which would be at least one level abstract. We really don't want those going places they're not supposed to go. So that is why we're going to disable this in particular.
Absolutely perfect. I mean, you want to make sure, I mean, anything globally just sounds a little bit scary by default. You want to keep things separate. So I think intuitively, I think this makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. This one wasn't really going to give me any troubles of why is that? And then,
Perfect. All right, let's go over to this next setting here. Enable online OCSP CRL checks is set to disabled. Now, intuitively, having more checks sounds like a good thing, but we're being told not to do this. Help me understand.
All right, I see. I think that's a security camera. It might be a mailbox. I also
Guys, all images are generated by my prompts via some DALL-E image maker.
Does it have eyes? Is it a worm with eyes holding up the camera?
I think I was trying, I can't remember my prompts. I think it was something like put a camera with an off-on switch. Anyway,
it's got an eye. So OSCP is Online Certificate Status Protocol, and CRL is Certificate Revocation Lists. So that's what those two acronyms mean there. This particular benchmark is not explicitly mapped, but I did a lovely reading on the research of this to make sure I did fully understand this, because I was scratching my head for the same reason. It's like, oh, okay. But the underlying system certificate library, it says, always performs these particular checks no matter what Chrome itself does. So enabling it here is redundant, and it also potentially could lead to poor privacy protection. So I have another thing I can talk about here. Revealing the details of people's browser history is not something we want to do to the operator of that OSCP responder. Accidental exposure types of things. So we don't want to do that. And that is why we are disabled. And this is another one of those that's not set. So disabled.
Awesome. Now we are making great time. So I want to put a little just kind of halftime question in front of you, Heather. I understand, I don't believe you have experience necessarily working at an MSP or MSSP personally, but clearly
is technically an MSSP. And we can talk about that later.
Yeah, absolutely. So
go ahead.
I know. So obviously you do have some very in-depth technical knowledge on these settings. Really, obviously we are going to be talking about more settings. We've talked about settings already. Is this something that you believe falls onto the responsibility of that MSP to manage for their clients? Or should clients be doing this on their own? Or is this a non-critical area?
Well, it's not critical until it's critical, right? Isn't that everything in cybersecurity? And we've got business things we've got to do. We've got risks that are fighting with risks, especially if you can take something like this and set it and forget it according to work that a lovely nonprofit CIS has already done for us. And then with Senteon's overlaying magic wizardry stuff that's happening here, these things can just be set and you're done. So I think that MSPs, this would be a lovely addition to what MSPs are doing in the services that they're providing as we get into the various and different browsers, because I know that beyond Chrome, we have, of course, other browsers to harden. And as Matt was saying, industry, it dictates that an organization should say, this is our browser, this is what we do, and then to work with that so that your attack surface is not, like that. We don't want to be using older browsers either. I remember the days of having to code when I was a coder, having to code for older browsers as well, and then dealing with the rogue variant of like IE4 or IE6 was pretty sticky, long past its time as well. So
can't use those anymore.
No. Still, I know also a lot of users see the browser as the internet and don't really know what the browser is. It's just click on the little, it used to be the E thing for Internet Explorer. You just click on that and go do your thing. And now, now I'm on the internet. We also used to turn our computers off. It's been a while. So let's set everything that we can set, especially if it doesn't disrupt our users, and then spend our time talking about cybersecurity where it really matters, and user behavior as another layer of defense and depth.
Yep, I think that's a great call out. And thanks for the shout out on Senteon. One thing I do want to emphasize, all of these recommendations we talk about are completely free and provided by CIS, as Heather talked about. And you are able to do these things manually, right? All of these can actually be configured at the group policy level. Not super familiar if you can do this via Intune. You might be able to do some, but you can do these with existing tools that you have today. The thing with Senteon is it actually makes sure it applies, it does the enforcement, change tracking, but the big thing here I want the audience to understand is you can take action today for the cost of labor to do it. So very cool. Let's get back into
the robotic arm, I like to say. You facilitate making all this easy, even if you put eyes on your camera.
I like that. That's better.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to this next setting here. So enable security warnings for command line flags is set to enabled. So we do want these warnings. Warnings usually, to me, sound like a good thing. It makes the human click an extra button to make sure they want to perform action. Am I understanding that correctly? Introduce this to us.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure everyone who is watching this is geeky enough to be a command line guru, but I remember, I'm going to go back to Windows 3.1. I found it to be a hassle and I would escape it and go to DOS. So that'll tell you something there. The command line used to be how we did computers because I come from that era. And so people who are adept with the command line are used to the command line, but people who aren't, I've taught people how to use the command line before. And so the assumption that everybody even understands what it is, to go and run that and do that in either Linux or DOS and do all the wizardry things we are capable of doing. At any rate, what this is specifically pointing at for these command line frags is when you invoke opening the browser or using the browser from the command line, you can do so with some dangerous things going on in the background. So if this were a movie, you would be hearing all that ominous music if somebody were to pop open the command line, open Chrome, and have it set to do nefarious things. So that is what we're working here, is if that were to occur in whatever thing we're working in, that we would get that, hey, did you know that someone is trying to open Chrome with the command line and providing dangerous flags? I think I've got that correct, because boy, when I was poking around here and doing that. So it's a very specific situation. We want those security warnings. We really want, I'm going to take it broader. We want security warnings everywhere. And then I'm going to back out of this one, going back to 8.3, which is the control, CIS 8.3. And that says, let's poke fun at this, because I would like you to explain this to me.
Oh boy.
Ensure that logging destinations maintain adequate storage to comply with the enterprise's audit log management process. So that's yes.
I will note we have tossed some comments over through CIS Workbench on opinions on how some things are either are or are not mapped. If I were to take a guess as to why they have this is because this will probably trigger some type of audit log or something that would not be there without this setting enabled. So that's my best assumption as to the crosswalk.
Yeah, and so with that, they're like cousins. They're not brothers. They're not the same thing. It's like, okay, you're incorporated in here because we love you, cousin. Come on over. We'll give you a mapping instead of leaving you off in non-map land or something. So anybody from the audience have any thoughts on this one? Is Zach spot on? Because I can buy that.
That's hopefully the best thing on the market. If anyone can improve it, I'm happy to hear it. So very good explanation on that. We'll see if any comments get dropped in. But while people are thinking, let's jump into this next one here. So third-party software injection blocking. We want to enable the blocking of this. What if I'm trying to do something, Heather? I got to have access to my device. Why do we want to block software injection?
There was a long time when I was doing sales support for my own company when it wasn't my company, which is a long story we don't have time to tell. I actually bought the company I worked for forever. But I used to be able to say that if you give me the requirements or I take them from you and you give me the right apparatus, I can make the code back in your carpet. I mean, seriously. That is what we're looking at here. Somebody with the right level of skill can attach to having some capability to get into your system and do something, and it can be malicious. And so we want to stop that third-party, potentially malicious software of being able to do things here. And that is vague. I'm basically looking at, you don't want to get a shot from anybody other than your person who's trying to give you a shot, as you've got those injections right there. This is one of those that, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, these recommendations all come under the assumption that you don't have any other security layers, you don't have an EDR. And I'm not saying if you have an EDR, you don't need this, you still do. But these are all just recommended layers that you can do in addition to your existing security stack. It's all about defense in depth. And if we do wrap up early, maybe we can do a little dive into what defense in depth means. But these settings realistically enhance the efficacy of your other solutions within your security stack.
I like it. With that, this is another one of those that is unset, but it is enabled. So that's a good news sort of thing. And this belongs to CIS Control 9.2, the safeguard, the second one. Use DNS filtering services on all enterprise assets to block access to known malicious domains. So this is another one of those where if we're going to take the logging explanation, this is a bit of a stretch as well. I would like to see maybe in future versions that CIS, instead of leaving something unmapped, it just maps it at the high level control because it clearly belongs in 9. I just don't know that it belongs anywhere specifically in 9. It's the spirit of 9, not the letter of any of the individual safeguards in 9. What do you think?
I love that. I think Matt made the comment. A lot of these settings obviously map back to control 4. If it says explicitly not mapped, why not just put it in 4?
I agree.
Not a question for me to answer, but I hope in version 9, maybe they watch some of these webinars and we'll see. All right. All right, perfect. Let's go to this next setting here. And I like this one because we're getting to the hardware level. So enables managed extensions to use the enterprise hardware platform API is set to disabled. Heather, I have an extension that I really, really need. It's going to make my life so much easier, but I need access. Why do we not want to say yes to that?
Well, you can have access to your extension if it's approved, but we really don't want that hardware API thing getting information about your machine through use of your browser to give to someone who could use that against you. And so that's certainly the spirit of this. Right there, you've got it under the did you know, enterprise APIs can expose sensitive hardware data. So API stands for Application Programming Interface, and you can do a bunch of really nifty things with those. They themselves are not always very locked down. So I looked this one up. They're very powerful. You got to use them intentionally. This particular one is part of Chrome for developers, and there's a method in there, the ability to interact with it, get hardware platform info, and that obtains the manufacturer and model for your hardware platform and can return it asynchronously via callback. And so that is pretty powerful, and we don't want to enable that because there's not really a good reason to enable it and it is one of those that is unset. So we're tying back to 4. So we're very happy there with CIS 4.8. Uninstall or disable unnecessary services on enterprise assets and software. And enterprise, Matt likes to say this, Matt Lee, enterprise does not mean giant company. It means anything that belongs to the organization that we're talking about. So services on enterprise assets and software, such as unused file sharing service, web application module, or service function. And we're arguing here, of course, browser.
It's a good mapping.
Why are you laughing?
It's a good mapping there.
Yeah, it is a good mapping. We need to call that out. That's a good mapping.
No, that's perfect. And to emphasize this as well, I guess I'm saying a broad statement without enough factual backing, but I'm going to assume the majority of extensions that your clients may want do not need access to this API anyway. So that is why I would assume this is a level 1 setting and that every business, every browser should have this explicitly configured. Good. All right, let's go into this next one. Man, I've been dreading saying this word on a live webinar.
I love this word.
Oh my gosh. When I made this slide, I was like, oh, am I going to have to say this on air?
No, I'll say it for you. You can pay me later.
Explain to us what's going on here.
Sure, but I have to give you the story first. I learned the word ephemeral when I was a fairly young woman. My mom taught English, and it was one of her words of the week. She would pick out these lovely words that no one on the planet knows, because back then we didn't know this word. And ephemeral means short-lived. And so, ephemeral is a lot of syllables. Short-lived is just 2. And so I'll always remember that. And of course, now it comes into play here. But another one of them, just before we get in here, because we do have time for me to go off on a tangent. One of her words of the week was pulchritude. You want to guess what that means?
Pulchritude?
Isn't
it? I don't want to guess.
So that means extreme physical beauty. So now you will forever tie ephemeral, short-lived to extreme physical beauty. And I won't even go to the metaphysics of that because, anyway, we want to make sure that data and all the things we might need to track for purposes of forensics or what have you, we want to make sure that that's not short-lived. So that's the way I want to tackle that. You've got it right here. Disabling the ephemeral profiles ensures that data is retained for necessary reviews, compliance, etc. And we're back to DNS land for CIS Control 9.2. And so we'll just look at that as an overarching thing, then maybe prove everything really is about it DNS, but we'll leave that
there. If something works, if something's broken, it's DNS. Anyway.
Something like that.
The big thing I want to say here.
DNS, you can't really reboot DNS.
Life would be too easy if we could do that. Anyway. Thing I want to mention here on this slide, but also a lot of these other slides that we talk about today and in the following weeks, these settings can heavily assist in that forensics audit. If there is a breach, if there is a compromise, I know I shouldn't say the B word live on air. If there's a compromise or an incident, these settings, when enabled, will provide certain pieces of data that could be critical to identifying where that initial point of compromise was, or enterprises today have to reveal a breach incident when it happens, or breach, whatever you want to call it, without getting in trouble.
Yeah, bad things.
A bad thing. These data need to be accessible, need to be on to get the correct and needed data for a proper forensics investigation. Shout out to a future webinar I know I'm planning with Eric Taylor. We will be diving a little bit more into the forensic side and why these settings are important. But Heather, do you agree with that? Is there more you want to add to it?
No, I think that really covers it. So it feels good. I like that word so much, ephemeral, just short-lived. And there are certain applications of it. Yeah, we can go into that if we have more time. My favorite ephemeral is Sunil but pets, cattle. We're not going to do pets and cattle, are we? We're not. No.
Yes. And Andy in the audience is calling out as well how these can help in those IR incidents, right? So this is critical data that you just wouldn't have without it, right? And some of these settings, specifically on the OS, but the browser as well, with Senteon, when a setting changes, we'll create an alert and whatnot. And a lot of our partners want to ingest that configuration change, whether it was authorized, unauthorized, into that SIM or source solution so that they can potentially have a critical piece of the puzzle they wouldn't have otherwise. So anyway, these settings all valuable, and we'll keep on with the train. So the next setting here import autofill form data from default browser on first run, set to disabled. Heather, I just let go of an employee, hired a new one, gave the same machine. Why do I maybe not want everything to just pop in?
Well, even before we get that, you said data, and now I know something about you.
Uh-oh, where I'm from?
No, it just, I categorize people and judge them whether they say data or data, and I won't say which way. So anyway, you have brought up a very important point here, another DNS, not DNS control. This is a one-time sort of thing. You see it there on first run. And we don't want things to be set by things other than us. Is intention here? This control is all about intention. So the autofill import is a control of saying, we don't want this, let's set this. We've got it up here on the data leaks, and clearly you know now what I say. And disabling that, the unintentional aspect of the data sharing, and then the nonsense on the oversharing. We want to stop autofilling pretty much everything, I think. And we have another setting coming up talking about that, because some data and things like that, sensitive data, make sure I said that correctly, that comes into play. This is another one of those that is unset. And so being intentional about this is a good thing as well.
I mean, I know I already kind of hinted at this earlier, but why is it important to be intentional? Why is it actually matter to an MSP to know these settings if they're already happening kind of by default?
You don't know what you don't know, and if you are intentional, you know. I think that's the easiest way to say it, is if you don't know what you're looking for, you can't inspect it. And I'm very fond of saying inspect what you expect. So you have to expect it, which means you have to be intentional and set it. And there are a lot of things in cybersecurity to be intentional about. So we are at a very granular level with the Chrome browser settings today, but if we take away a broader thing, be intentional. Okay.
If you did need to, attest to any of this in court or legality battle, do you think there's value to showing it explicitly configured versus not configured with the same behavior?
Yes, absolutely. And I won't go to the court. I'll just go into theory of anything you can show you've explicitly done. There's value in it, as if it's a good thing. Of course, it goes the other direction if you've explicitly done something bad. But here, that's why we have what we have here in these benchmarks, is that you don't have to think about it.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. And like you hinted at, some of these settings do kind of correlate together. So this next one here is about import of homepage from default browser on first run is set to disabled as well. Kind of the same context. What did that last person have on their homepage? But explain to us a little bit more.
There's not a whole lot on this one we can talk about. Would you like to make something up? We could have some fun with that.
Oh, I mean, the why it matters, I always find interesting, because I was trying to think of a scenario, right? If a bad actor changes this, just living in the device, waiting until they run the browser for the first time, could, launch a redirect, launch an executable, right? So
public computer.
I don't know if it's real. It's kind of something I'm stretch storytelling, but these things could happen.
Yeah, it's good because sometimes you do sit down at the public computer and check the weather in the city you're visiting. Sure. I don't know why you would do that in 2024 when you've got a smartphone, but there's a time past where that made sense. But yeah, the idea here, again, it's the intention. We control first run there, or the first time you sit down, or when you do that, it's good. I'm on the next control. I shouldn't do that. I need to stay on this control because it is important and it needs some love. But I like back to that airplane in the sky thing. You want to know where things are going to land. I had a meme I did about a year and a half ago because I hit a typo squat thing and I saw it and I'm trying to backpedal it. It's like, oh no, I typed that wrong. And it was truly not where I was going, but it tried to look like where I was going. But it's the same thing about intention when we don't use the internet with half your brain sort of thing. Anyway, back to this. I know this is important enough. I should say something about it. You have to set that homepage intentionally, and you begin with unsetting because it's unset. Even though,
absolutely,
yeah.
And let's get to the setting that you are so excited about. And it's also The next setting here is also the last setting of today, and then we're going to get into some more higher level concepts, talk about MITRE a little bit, but last setting here, import search engines from default browser on first run. I think a lot of the last three settings have a little bit of the same theme.
They do have the same flavor, but I have to make fun of your image again. So is that two different like locks and two different ways to get in?
Come on, Heather. I'm just going to say yes.
You don't like me picking apart your images?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. If I spent any more time on image generation, I would not have the slides ready for the next week.
It's good, but you know, it's like a Rorschach blot, you know, a personality sort of thing. Because I see up here it looks like a person sitting in Luke's land speeder from Star Wars.
Oh my goodness.
And then the two locks, you know, that would be a pretty unsafe land speeder, but I don't know. So it's the same thing with the search engines. This is still not 9.2. We're still in DNS land, although we've gone to another area that, Anyway, imported search engines, they can override secure defaults. And so we could circumvent all this hard work we're doing if that were the thing.
Yes.
So the other thing, restricting imports, it says here, maintains security integrity of the search settings. Yeah, I like that too. We're intentional. Again, these last three have all been about very specific things, but the overarching theme of all of these benchmarks is be intentional. And they do make memes about these sorts of things where you have two locks to get into the same place to help you get to the human. So maybe the next time you do one of these, do notice if it has two locks, because then you just need one of the keys. And that in and of itself is a security risk. So anyway.
Perfect. Awesome. And that
when is she going to be done with this benchmark?
I mean, I think we could have probably put these all on one slide, but you know, it's about consistency.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
All right. And now transitioning to the MITRE attack technique. So Heather, on the screen here, I just listed out 6 different techniques. I do have the technique number listed in the bottom right if you wanted to look these up on your own. But the settings we discuss here today, I did my best to kind of, well, one, CIS maps these controls to the MITRE attack framework. So these are examples of settings we discussed today that crosswalk to MITRE. So by having the settings we discussed today hardened, you're mitigating the risk of any of these attack techniques being successful. So that's a big thing I really just wanted to call out on this slide. But Heather, are there any of these or all of them, just some of them? Is there anything you really want to dive into that's on this slide and talk a little bit more towards?
Probably the 3 I'm most attached to are that execution through API, just because it does have, it lives in my world, and credential access is the same thing. And then the browser extension, because all those things are very important and easier. We don't want to make these attacks any easier. So that's another way to look through here. Subvert trust controls, we touched on that, of course, and then the exfil.
You know, Heather, sorry to interrupt you. You said we don't want to make these attacks easy.
Yes.
Could you elaborate? How does hardening a system make it more difficult? Why does that happen?
Well, a couple things. All the low-hanging fruit is higher up in the tree now. So anything that's simple, known, and easy to exploit, anything that you've gone and looked at tactics, techniques, and procedures of attackers who've been successful, like, because attackers who are nascent or new and trying to do this are studying those, as well as our defenders are studying those, and MITRE is a great resource. If we can just take all the easy stuff and get it knocked out of the way, that gives us potentially a little bit of time to frustrate an attacker and then come back and really do all the things for maturity that we need to do to harden our systems. Because of course, this is just a level, and there's always, as I say, another princess and another castle, because we're in a giant game of Mario with cybersecurity. Are we not?
I have not heard it put that way, but now it's all I'll think about every day.
Yeah. Mushrooms and turtles and geese and all the things, and Yoshi, they all live in our world, and we just want to make things as hard as we can for people to attack us. And the people who are not that motivated, if we can get them to give up and move on to somebody else, then that's something.
You said two key points. So the first key point I heard was time. A
Mhm.
successful outcome of hardening is simply that attacker having to invest more time. If you're a difficult target, to your last point, they'll probably move on to that easier target, right? So if we're able to change these settings and just eliminate the low-hanging fruit to make the attacker do more work, you're mitigating a lot more risk than you realize.
Yeah, and it's just a good practice as well to try to, and it adds an element of whimsy to it if you can say, well, okay, I'm doing these things so that I'm more resilient as an organization. And there are so many levels of resilience and so many different areas we need to harden and be more resilient about. We're not touching on any of those things today beyond the browser hardening in Chrome within the CIS benchmarks. But as a broader concept, this fits really well within there because people use Chrome and this is a direct interface. The browser is where we're touching the human. So we're at that 8th layer, the human.
And I mean, the browser, a lot of MSPs say, and when I talk about it, it's a lot of MSPs say sometimes hardening is hard to educate that end client on, hey, why do they need this? How do I get them to pay for this? The browser is kind of like a cheat code. You know, everyone uses a browser. So it's easy to paint a story of this being the gateway to things unknown, right? So leverage the metaphors, leverage what you can. Heather is the most incredible resource ever for metaphors and storytelling and writing. So definitely reach out to her after the show. We'll drop your LinkedIn into the chat. But all right, let's go into this last slide here. So we obviously talked about the attacker point of view. This is another reoccurring slide that you'll see every single week. We have MSPs in the audience, Heather. A lot of MSPs I just shared, like, don't know how to present this. Oh my gosh, it's another line item of cost. I don't have the resources to do this. These are just 6 key benefits of hardening. And I was curious if you could kind of talk towards this. What would you say to an MSP considering going down this journey?
Well, we've been in the land of the castle there with the Mario and the security enhancement. So that's good. Compliance and trust, there are things we have to do that maybe sometimes we don't realize we have to do and customers, you know, there's always compliance and compliance has to be met, but trust is that level, a couple levels beyond that says, okay, we're mature enough that we're beyond compliance. And I'm talking about the MSP's customers, we have a real cybersecurity program here and we're poised for the future. As a business owner, I mean, that can keep you up at night. And I think that's universal too, that in this, I guess we're in our 3rd decade of the 21st century, which is a little hard to believe, but we've got to, if we're operating businesses, we've got to be secure. And that goes for the MSPs as well and their customers. And so the user impact, we've been talking about that. We've got a blog coming out that most of these settings, especially in that first grouping, don't really impact the user in the day-to-day. And so those are easy things to do to make the user more secure and without being painful. And then you look at your operational risk. Well, we touched that as well. It's pretty heavily tied to that security enhancement, your operational risk and compliance and trust. Those are all put a circle around those or something. And then the cost benefit is where we're really having trouble. That's almost best done through analogy of something in the real world, because that can be very hard to say, well, you got to do more stuff and you got to pay us for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, every security layer, there's going to be either a cost association or labor association. The real challenge, I guess, is making sure they understand the value or the return on that investment from an end client perspective. So, you know, Heather was talking about user impact. Some of these controls may not allow the user to perform an incorrect action that they had been performing in the past. By correcting this behavior, they may become more efficient, right? So trying to tie these hardening settings back to efficiency and standardization and using terms that the end user will understand. I will note, Matt Lee last week said, I would never show an end client any of these settings. I don't disagree with him, but the concept maybe needs to be introduced, and then it's something you just do.
It's your individual users in the day-to-day who do not need to understand these, but the values conveyed to the business owners and operators, that has to be there of, here's this an additional like layer of bastion like level security, another shield, etc. And I went outside of Mario Land with that. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I played. Are there shields? There might be shields.
Yeah, just mushrooms, you grow, and you're super strong. Anyway, no, that is perfect. And that is today's episode. So, Heather, we do have a few extra minutes. I know you mentioned wanting to dive a little bit deeper, I think, back to the security of excellence, maybe some stories. Are there anything you want to add or any closing thoughts? What's on your mind? The last 5 minutes are yours.
Okay, so Missouri Cybersecurity Center of Excellence has a Security Operations Center, a SOC, that we built in April. And of course, like anything with a nonprofit, nothing goes smoothly, wonderfully, or well. You have to build the whole thing all at once, and it's like giving birth to a 30-year-old. So all your programs, everything needs to be in place. You've got grants, you've got all these things, but the reception we're getting in our community here is really strong. A lot of potential interns are coming to us, and we're hoping to get more. We haven't even advertised that part of it yet, and I think we're very close to being full for the fall. So if you happen to be a potential intern here in this area, because we are definitely starting local, then please do reach out to me, and you can use LinkedIn, or if you know my email address, do please reach out, because we're getting some great traction there. We're also providing services and befriending all of our local MSPs so that we can help with our expertise. I am the least experienced human in technology at this organization right now. It is pretty astonishingly awesome. And volunteers are coming out of the woodwork as well. And so trying to put together some events for prospective interns and our volunteers and our staff so that we can really have some good conversations about cybersecurity, what it means, and that there is something in this field for everybody. And I have this broad vision plan for people who are not yet skilled enough for our program to try to help get them there. And I think I said earlier, so that anybody who comes to us, there's some way we can meet them and give some advice or some direction. And then for the people who fit directly into the program, to really serve them well. And at the end, of course, help them get some jobs with that newfound experience that they get.
Now, out of curiosity, obviously we have an MSP audience, and from what I understand and the partners I work with, they're always looking to hire. Is there ways for the audience to potentially volunteer their time, sign up their MSP to be a resource of hiring? How can the MSP get involved?
Absolutely. If you're looking at remote workers, if you're not in our area, then just reach out to me. LinkedIn's an easy way to get me, or I'm just hnoggle@mccoe.org. That's
LinkedIn is in the chat now as well.
Perfect. So we can just do that and make that the way we talk about it. We do serve MSPs as well. I mean, we have a SOC, so we can do those things and do security assessments as well. And looking at really bolstering this whole region. And then the really, really cool, awesome thing is, in a few years when we're a mature organization, we have the general idea what size we're going to be. And we're hopeful to be able to take this program, whether there's a small charge for it because we're a nonprofit and we've put our hearts and souls into it, but just to say, okay, great, we're the Missouri Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. So Colorado, would you like our program? Go take this, execute it. We'll be around as a resource, etc. So very excited about all the things that this can be. And this is where I'm spending my time and my passion right now.
And I love the passion. It screams through what you're saying. And we do have a few more comments saying you did a great job today. So you absolutely killed it. I do want to highlight Andy Lahrens as well. Owners and stakeholders need to know the risk so that they can give the go ahead to mitigate it. So, wrap up, tie in this comment and share some closing thoughts on hardening and I guess today's episode.
I think we have to speak those things in English and not talk about hardening. And that's the most difficult thing, is to take a technical concept and make it relatable to the business, because the people MSPs are serving, they're sometimes technical companies, but often not. And so to take that extra time and find the right allusion, allegory, metaphor, story, what have you, whatever you want to put in there, to relate to the specific business outcomes and also the specific business operations for your client, that will pay off in the end to help you get what you want for them, to give them value.
Very, very awesome. Well, Heather, thank you so much for being here. Let's highlight this wrap up slide. Again, we are here weekly. Next week's guest is actually another CIS working group member that joined me, Heather, Matt Lee, and many others. Maria Scarmando. We will be talking more about the privacy and security settings within Chrome. These webinars are ready for replay on our YouTube channel, on our website, senteon.co, or search Senteon in YouTube. You will find us. And if you do stay here for the episodes and join weekly, we do have a gift, right? Thank you for joining. So Senteon is available. Just let us know that you watched the webinar, and we will provide you 100 free assessments. What these assessments are is actual sales presentations you can show your end clients or just take internally to know where you sit, right? We will give away this information just for being part of the show. One other thing I will hint in the background, if Bob's still in the audience, we are talking about potentially making a little CIS community, which we'll get into hopefully in later weeks. But that is it for this week's episode. We made it right on time. Heather, killed it. Thank you for being here, and thank you for everyone.